Good evening. I'd like to call the October 22nd Committee of the Whole meeting to order. Mrs. Hutchison, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Blattner?
Here.
Ms. Wheaton?
Here.
Mr. Hamlin?
Here.
Paulson?
Here.
Ms. Holovitz is absent. Mr. Long is absent. Ms. Crabtree?
Here. Before we do the pledge, I'd like us to take a moment of silence. Yesterday, we lost a student, Maximus Tomchak, from a freshman at Wheaton North, and our thoughts tonight are with our Wheaton North community, our school community, and Maximus' family. Would you please rise for the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like a motion and a second to suspend the rules and adjourn to workshop setting.
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Wooten. Second by Mr. Paulson. Mrs. Hutchison, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Wooten?
Yes.
Mr. Paulson?
Yes.
Ms. Blattner?
Yes.
Mr. Hamlin?
Yes.
Ms. Crabtree?
Yes. Okay, we have one item, Vision 2026 District Dashboard, Illinois Student Report Card, and Learning Acceleration. Dr. Schuler?
Thank you. So we're excited with the board to be back in your second Committee of the Whole meeting this year. Just as a quick recap to our September meeting, we spent a lot of time in September really diving into what is one of your core strategies for this year and your strategic plan on learning acceleration. You might recall we spent a lot of time looking at understanding FastBridge and its point of connection to a number of the different strategies within our strategic plan and our learning acceleration work. And so we're back this evening with round two of our student achievement look and information. So Mrs. Murphy is going to be taking the lead again tonight, and a few things that she's going to be giving the board an update on. One are some of the items that sit on our district dashboard. There are some additional items that are on the Illinois School Report Cards that are not specifically on our Vision 2026 dashboard that she's going to give you some updates on, and then again bring that back to really connecting to our learning acceleration work. And so I want to put a really fine point right on this. So I think when you develop a four-year strategic plan, you do it for the purpose of making sure that you have alignment and consistency in the organization. Right? District 200 is a big school district, and so to make sure that you align strategies and cascade and really move that strategy through the organization, strategic planning is really important to get the arrows aligned. But I also do believe that in any strategy, you have to be agile. So you have to understand what you're seeing in student achievement data. And so I think what you're going to see in a couple of minutes as Mrs. Murphy walks you through is that she's provided for you a little note-taking sheet. Does not mean you have to fill out all aspects of the note-taking sheet. But I would encourage you through the presentation tonight to jot down kind of notice and wonder questions, right? Things you see in the data, things you wonder as a result of the data, because at the end of the presentation tonight, what we want to bring it back to in the conversation is really ultimately to the question of, do we still see our strategy align, right? So as the strategy, as we've mapped that out, right, the work that we're doing in learning acceleration, does it still align to what you see, at least in the elements of student achievement data that you're going to see tonight? If not, where do we see perhaps some misalignment, or where's there a need to kind of shoulder our, work with our strategy? So again, it's difficult in the middle of the school year, and I don't think you're going to see any sort of points that are going to say, wow, we need to make a left turn in our strategy, but certainly you may see some areas where you question or you wonder if we need to put a fine point on some aspects of our strategy, especially in future board meetings and board conversations. So I just want to set that up at the front end tonight. Certainly is a public reporting of information that will be released very shortly here on our school report cards, but from the board perspective, that's really the core question is, what do you see? And do you still feel confident in the strategy as it's been mapped out? What questions do you have about that? That makes sense before we get started? All right, Mrs. Murphy.
All right, good evening. Thank you, Dr. Schuler. So piggybacking on what Dr. Schuler set up here, there are 4 guiding questions for the presentation this evening. So we're going to first start by analyzing K-8 academic achievement. Then we're going to move into high school academic achievement. After that, we're going to get specific about our Illinois school report card. And then based on all that information that we see from those metrics, I'm going to be speaking very specifically about our work plan. So we're going to start out with 2nd through 8th grade demographic data. So here you can see the percentage of students in the various demographic groups that we monitor. And I'm also going to say that within your green folder, you also have a document that shows you this information as well, so you can refer back to it at any point. So you have the percentages, but also the exact number of students. And just a reorientation to our dashboard metrics for K-8, and we're starting with math. Here you'll see all of the metrics that sit on our dashboard. We have early math achievement, which comes from FastBridge for K-1. We don't have that this evening, though, because this is our first year giving that assessment. Then we have FastBridge, we have for 2 through 5. We gave that all last year, so we can report that out along with 6-8 FastBridge data. We will also in the future be reporting out the growth from FastBridge for K-8, but again, that's on pause until next year when we have the kindergarten and 1st grade data. And then we also have IAR for grades 3 through 5 and 6 through 8. I do want to emphasize that over the last 4 years, IAR has not really been a consistent data point for us, nor do we have trend data necessarily. Just a reminder, 2019 was the very first year we administered IAR. We had the pause in 2020. In 2021, we only have a partial data set. 78% of our students participated in that assessment because there was there weren't the same requirements in place last year, or in 2021 rather, but in 2022, last year, we did have full participation. So, okay, we're going to be looking at the FastBridge results and the IAR results, and this is just a reminder, when we're looking at the FastBridge results, that is based on national percentiles. And we use the metric of the 50th percentile on our dashboard because FastBridge does say students who are scoring at or above the 50th percentile are performing at or above grade level expectations. We generally say they are secure in grade level learning. Here's a reminder of how IAR is reported out. There are 5 proficiency levels. Students that score at a 4 or 5 are considered meeting or exceeding expectations. This all was originally based on the PARC assessment. And when we moved away from PARC, we moved to IAR. We applied that same proficiency levels. We actually kept the exact same cut score, so a 750 is considered meeting or exceeding meeting standards rather. And here you'll see a visual of kind of a breakdown. So that breakdown is not District 200's breakdown of proficiency. This is actually a screenshot from previous state data. So you see at the highest level, in this particular case, 3% of students are exceeding on that particular test. So again, this is the note-taking document that Dr. Schuler referred to. So we are breaking this up into the various categories that we're looking at from different levels and math and reading. And we have 4 columns. So we're asking what you notice about the data. We're asking what you're wondering about. We're asking you also to note down any celebrations and then any concerns. So we'll pause at the different points in time to discuss this as well. Okay, so here we start with 2nd through 8th grade math achievement based on FastBridge. So for every one of the slides, you will see that it is broken out by the all, but also by the same demographic groups. So the lighter blue is 2nd through 5th grade, and the darker blue is 6th through 8th grade. I also do want to remind the board that we set that goal of an increase by 12% through the Life of Our Vision 2026 strategic plan. So here you'll see 66% of our 2nd through 5th graders were at or above the 50th percentile in math as of spring last year, and then 61% at the middle school. At or above the 50th percentile. Mm-hmm.
Is ML multilingual?
Thank you. Yes. Yes. Multilingual. He has ML. Okay. Here you'll see 3rd through 8th grade math achievement for IAR. And so once again, we have side by side our elementary and our middle school. And the next few slides I'm going to go into are really going to dive more deeply into those results per level. So 3rd through 5th grade math achievement, here you see some trend data. So we have 2019 is the light blue, 2021 is the dark blue, and 2022 is the red. The percent of students meeting or exceeding in math. Now, I do want to just remind once again, 2021 is that partial data set. So 2019 and 2022 are more comparable. It is important to note right here, you'll see in our overall all data, we have returned to that pre-pandemic achievement in math, with 53% of students meeting or exceeding standards in math this past year and also in 2019. Here, we're diving in deeper by grade level. So you're going to see comparison of 3rd grade 2019 to 3rd grade 2022, and this is broken out by proficiency level. It's also 4th grade for the same 2 years and 5th grade. So the dark blue at the top is students who were at level 5, according to proficiency, and all the way down to a level 1. I want to point out to the board, at every level, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade in 2022, we have more students exceeding in math than we did have in 2019.
Again, we were talking, when you go to IAR, previous slide, it's at or above level.
4, if
4
they have
above.
4 or 5. Mm-hmm.
Got it.
Correct.
Can I ask a question about that? It's hard to digest all this. If I look at the first 2 columns, grade 3, 2019, 2022. So if I take the dark blue and the middle blue, and I look at those are graphically 2022 more than go further down. 2019, that'd be more students being or exceeding than 20. The other correction.
Yeah, so here you see, let's take 3rd grade here, for example. So in 2019, 11.3% of students exceeded in third grade, and in 2022, we have 17.9% of students exceeded the standards. And then it's also important to look at the students that met. So in third grade, 48.3% met standards. And then in third grade, 45% met standards.
So in third grade, more students met or exceeded than
Yes,
in the fourth grade and fifth grade, about the same.
about the same. But overall, more students exceeded in 2022 at each grade level. So we'll see it. In third grade, we had 17.9% exceeded in last year, 8% in fourth grade, and 9% in fifth grade.
How do the changes to the 2022 IAR impact those results? Do we know?
We don't have a lot of information on any kind of changes that they made.
But there were changes made.
That we were told that there were some changes made to test items.
I just want to be sure that we're comparing apples to apples.
It's a similar
Okay.
two data points that we can compare at this point. Generally, they make changes. I don't know the specifics, but generally my experience has been they make changes, they take out items that might not have been valid or reliable according to, their test analysis.
So the changes they made in 2022 were typical of what they would make.
That would be my understanding, yes. Good to move on here. You'll see middle school, math achievement. Again, this is that graph that shows you the 2019 data, the 2021, and the 2022, where I really look at this as the 2019-2022 comparison. You can see the overall percentage of students meeting or exceeding standards in math is not where it was at pre-pandemic. I do also want to emphasize to the board, if you remember in 2019 when I did this presentation, we started talking about the work that we knew we needed to do in math at the middle school. That was one of the very first things that I identified and talked about doing work in, and we were already geared up in 2020, 2021 to do the pilot that we are actually in right now. And so we were already aware of that metric there, and we're gearing up to do work in that space. Here's the same graph that we looked at for elementary. Now we're looking at this for math for middle school. Sixth grade is more similar between 2019 and 2022, but we do see differences in seventh and eighth grade in particular, of the percentage of students that are meeting and exceeding in 2022 versus 2019. Okay, so I'm just going to stop here with the math for a moment and take any questions or anything you noticed, celebrations, or concerns.
Was last year our first year of math coaches, or is that this year?
Yes, last year was the very first year.
At middle school.
Correct.
On slide 8, so these numbers are this year, is that right?
That is correct.
This is the fast bridge that was just,
It was just, no, this is on slide 15, the FastBridge data. Is that what you're? Oh,
here.
sorry.
Slide 8. Yeah.
Page
Oh, I'm
8.
sorry.
No, I skipped ahead, I'm sorry. It was on slide 8, not
Yeah,
page 8.
slide 8, number page 4, yeah.
So this is the data from spring of 2022.
Oh, okay.
Because we did administer FastBridge 3 times last year to our 2nd through 8th grade students. This was because we knew we needed some additional data points coming out of the COVID pandemic and returning to school. We wanted more information.
Yeah. So, you know, I think the big thing that stands out here are, outside of Asian, you know, basically are non-white, low-income students fell quite a bit. And I guess, you know, I think we've talked about that through other meetings and that, but then also when you look at the IAR, and I know this is 2 through 8, and then the slide that's right next to it on paper is 3 through 5 IAR, like you see a little bit different picture where those different demographics are scoring higher, you know, or better in 2022. So I guess what's the differences there? You know, does that make sense? So like looking at, you know, our, like Hispanic students, they were 39 in 2 through 5 and then 36 in 6 through, oh, I'm sorry, hang on. Well, okay, so it's, I'm sorry. So it's the grade levels though, but there's just a significant drop between grades 2 through 5 and 6 through 8 on those graphs that they just all seem to go down. And
Yeah.
what, you know, where, I guess where we, I guess having the math coaches at the middle schools and I guess
Yeah,
it's just,
one of the things I do want to remind the board of is during the pandemic, we made a change at the elementary level and started using a common digital resource called Zern for math at the elementary level only. That is a highly rated resource, and just like I am, highly rated resource, and it had outstanding problem solving that was present in those materials. And I've talked to the board multiple times about the importance of high quality instructional materials. And so I think that's an important point to note.
that's why.
In the I think in the elementary space, there's a opportunity to celebrate that the use of that material supported our students well.
But I guess, I mean, I hear that and I understand what you're saying and I agree with that, but then I guess, are you saying that these drops here, we're doing a pilot now to change those materials at the middle school and that should hopefully help drive some of these numbers?
Yes.
Okay.
We know, like, if you remember from our FastBridge conversations, I talked to you about MTSS and that triangle, and if you remember, part of that triangle is like making sure tier 1 core instruction is high quality, and like high quality instructional materials are a very important factor to that.
So slide 10.
Mhm.
I guess when I look at this, so 3rd through 5th grade, IAR, just kind of comparing the light blue to the reds, 2019 and 2022. Pretty much every column, except for maybe Asian, is either at or above where that subgroup was in 2019, right? So they're achieving higher. Even with the pandemic, they're achieving higher than where they were in 2019. So all is up, all is the same. Low end comes down a little bit. IEP's up. Multi-language or bilingual's up. Asian's actually down. Black is up. Hispanics up. White's down a little bit by 2 points. So to me, that's the more, as I think you said, that's the more relevant comparison. Is where were we in 2019? Seems like most of the groups are ahead or just above. Let's see, that is a positive for math.
Yes.
And for grades 3 through 5, because it's not the same for middle school scores. If I can jump in just quickly. So I expected there to be a discrepancy with FastBridge and IAR, but I feel it's more significant than I expected. So is FastBridge a good assessment of how our students are performing if they're coming in so much lower on IAR?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this question. So I think there's a couple of things to talk about with this. I'm very cautious in always, like, comparing two different assessments. It's hard to say that any two assessments are going to be similar, right? But we are using FastBridge to help make important decisions. And so you have to remember about FastBridge is it is an assessment that is given to give it, and it also is given in a time period that we get data immediately, and all of those items then are computer scored. IAR has items that are hand scored. And so actually that's a good opportunity to walk over to this document right over here that's in your folders. I put this together and shared this actually last week with our CAC group. And I think it helps understand the difference between the assessments. So here you're going to see some like a screenshot of IAR released items, and you're going to see illustrative math released items. And when you walk through this, you're going to see, especially on the third page, items that ask students to explain and to justify with one set of problems with multiple explanations. FastBridge doesn't contain items like that because it's administered, we get the results right away. But we do have that information with our high quality resource of IM. And so it's underneath the problems that are the IAR, you see an example from IM that is very similar. So FastBridge gives us a piece of information that is absolutely important, but we also know that there are items our students are going to have on the IAR that's going to require them to do more explanation, and we get that information from our classroom assessments.
I think my concern would be, is FastBridge going to lead us to think that our students are performing better than they are comparatively to the other students in the state?
I don't think so. So let me give you a thought process around that. Each of these assessments is going to give you a different piece of information, right? What I would say, I guess, on FastBridge is that FastBridge is actually giving you, I think, a more relevant comparison because it's a national norming of how kids are doing versus kids at that same grade level, kind of more broadly around the country. The reality is, so to answer part of your question, if you want to know how are we doing relative to the state, we'll have to see that when the report cards are officially released. I think our ground, especially at the 3-5 level relative to the state, we likely made pretty significant jumps because I think what you're going to see in the state is that the state as a whole has not recovered from to 2019 levels. In fact, there still is pretty significant regression around the state. So our placement relative to students around the state has probably increased significantly. We won't see that, though, until all report cards are released. So this is our data. We get an early look at our data as it's going to appear on the report card. But until those report cards go live statewide, we don't see the state level comparison. That'll be out in a couple of days. But I would come back to saying I think both of them give you valuable information, right? What I want to know is, regardless of the two assessments, if we're starting here on one and we're starting here on one, I want to see that we're increasing in both, right? My goal is not to necessarily level out performance in the two because they're two assessments, and I'm not sure they're ever going to be like student by student, like spot on in terms of the percent that meet or exceed because the scale is just different, right, in each of the assessments. But what I believe is that regardless, if we see performance increase significantly on FastBridge, I think you're going to see performance increase as well on IAR. My concern, if you were to just say, look, like, let's take Fastbridge and push it to the side, is if we were to focus on IAR, beyond this discussion point tonight, we really can't do a whole lot with it because we won't see another data set for an entire year. And so, whereas at least with Fastbridge, when we get to the middle of this school year, we're going to see a second data point to say, hey, did the same, whatever percentage of kids that were performing at grade level at the start of the year, are they still performing at grade level? And how many of them hit their requisite growth target? And then we're going to see it again at the end of the year. So at least in terms of utility for our classroom teachers and our teams, that's much more actionable data to say, again, like, one is our core experience working and producing results? Do we have the right kids and the right interventions so that the students that need to see accelerated growth are seeing accelerate? So I think, I guess, regardless of which you sort of, long explanation, but which you believe more or want to lean to, the practical reality is IAR, beyond this, we can't do anything with it for another kind of full year because that's just the way that cycle works, whereas I think Fastbridge we can get more actionable. But I think you're going to see, if you see increase in one, I think you're going to see increase in the other.
And that's helpful. And I will say that I do think that the Illinois State testing, IAR, PARC, has inherent flaws. Like, I don't know that it's a good measure of, or has been historically a good measure, so I kind of take it with a grain of salt, especially where they set their, the levels. So thank you. That helps. One concern, I think, from seeing the data for middle school is so we can pilot the new middle school IM math program and help bring those scores up. But this particular set of students who were in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade last year, who are now like some in high school, like, how do we get those kids to where they need to be?
Yeah, no, I think it's fair. I think it's fair and a good question. So I think you'll see part of the answer as we get into the high school metrics, right? And we look ultimately, so at the high school level, again, we're really measuring 4 things for each individual student, right? We're measuring how did they transition into high school, right? So what were they successful in their freshman year experience in high school? We're measuring their growth trajectory on SAT as they move from PSAT at the end of 8th grade all the way up to SAT junior year. We're measuring math proficiency by a definition that's a little broader than just an SAT score. So there are multiple pathways where a student can show math proficiency by the time they graduate, and we're measuring English proficiency in kind of the same way through multiple measures. So that I think the very specific answer to that when kids get into high school is they move from this sort of I guess what I would call a linear progression of skills in reading and math into they enter a pathway of courses aligned to where they want to be by the time they finish high school and transition on. And the ultimate marker of success, I think, at the high school is how does a student do in that trajectory, right? Like I challenge myself with a path that gets me to where I want to be post high school, and I think the ultimate marker is am I successful in that course path? But we have these other kind of pieces we'll go through in a little bit.
Because I do think that there are 3 years of students, particularly if you look at our freshmen, who are in a lower path than they would have been, and there's no way to kind of jump up that path.
Yeah. One
they're
other
scoring at 20%
yeah.
or
Yeah.
What
One other measure, though, I guess I would so 2 ways that look at that. One is, right, so the other metric that I didn't measure that we'll look at when we get into the high school is how are we challenging students into a rigorous sequence of courses. So we also measure which of our students are taking an early college opportunity well in high school, and you really can't get onto the pathway, right, to access those early college opportunities unless you're accelerating. So we have a very defined sort of focus and process on how we challenge and move kids up. We did also add last year an academic intervention position at each of the high schools to focus very specifically on students that we felt we needed to both catch up and accelerate right into to our level. So I think you're going to see parts of the answer. There's not as sort of like magical of a content-based intervention as much as I think it is about helping kids to be successful and challenging them to accelerate, also recognizing at high school that we don't put a cap on the course experience. So a student wants to challenge themselves with an opportunity they can challenge right into a course opportunity, right? There's not like an artificial cap saying, gosh, you know, Rob, if we didn't recommend placement into a particular course, you can't ever access or get there. But we'll get. I mean, I think those are great questions, and part of what's at the core, and I hear in a couple of these, right? No doubt, right? I think the sort of the overall math summary elementary level, I think the path looks a whole lot better, right? Like coming out of the pandemic, I think, and I think you'll see when we get into this, the other piece that we have only for the second time. So in 2019 was the first time the state also had what they called a growth score that did not look super good in 2019. Our growth scores look a lot better in 2022 as well. So outcome looks good, growth looks accelerated relative to the state. That's especially true at 3, 5, 6, 8. We got work to do.
Yeah, I think Angela's observation, the question would be, what data points triangulate to that, right? Which is kind of what you were saying. And what are the strategies? We validate that. What are the strategies we put in place to tactically address that?
Yep.
So it's hard for us as a governing group to kind of pressure test those strategies or those tactics, right? So helping that would be, sometime down the road would be helpful. I like the pathway.
And I think that probably the way to do that ultimately, so actually now that I'm looking around the room, I don't think anybody was a part of it. So last year with Dave and with Mary, through the board's equity committee, we actually looked at some data samples to really show how that work is happening. And I think one of the things that may be useful is to replicate that. I think if we brought some teams, so I think Melissa has described, right, the thing that Melissa, Chris, Charlie, Jason, teams have done really well is bring this data to a team at each building to do a very deep dive into, these are percentages, right? But what sits behind the percentages are students that we need to know, hey, so, the 10% of our students that are, performing are the 9.5% of our grade 3 students that are performing at level 2 on IAR, and or when we look at that on FastBridge, who are they? And what are we doing specifically for those students? Where are they receiving support and intervention? Is it the classroom teacher that's giving them a little bit more? If it's a multilingual teacher, what is the multilingual teacher providing in terms of very specific intervention? And that's the magic of the work that you can't see necessarily behind the percentages, but we would be certainly happy as we continue to explore strategy in the future to bring some of that to you so you get some insight into how do you take these numbers and then put them very specifically into strategy.
So my core observation, 3 through 8th grade math, is really in slides 11 and 13. They're facing pages. So just the combination of 3, 5, numbers 4 and 5 versus 6, 8 levels 4 and 5, they're much bigger at the elementary level. So that tells me, what do I see? Middle school focus.
But those middle school students are heading out of middle school. I just worry about that particular group of
Right,
kids.
but
I
the
understand.
elementary kids are going into middle school. So
Right,
we still
they're-
need to focus on
They're
it.
doing great, and we'll. So is the lower score? So if the elementary kids are going into middle school, the grade 3 to 5 kids are going in, and they're doing fairly well or fairly where they were pre-pandemic, so we're kind of on a good path. But then there's that group of kids who were in middle school who I feel it can be a little life-changing, you know, and kind of change their path. And I don't know the solution to that.
But that's why I like their tactics, their strategies and tactics, and that group has been identified, right? That we will have activities in place or tactics in place to address that group as it goes through. So I think your observation is valid, and now the question is, what are we doing about it? Which I think is what you're saying. And so that's why I think pulling out those tactics and strategies makes a lot of sense.
And I want to piggyback kind of on Angela, because I look at the 8th grade scores from last year, and I think, okay, these are freshmen that are now in more prescribed classes, I guess is what I'm, like, are we seeing, and I know it's still relatively early in the year, but are our freshman math teachers finding there's holes in foundations? That would be my, and then what do we do? Like, we have strategies with math coaches now in our middle schools, but what are we doing at our high schools? That's what I just want to know. It's like, is there something there that we're doing for those kids?
Yeah, and so the question I would ask, from a governing perspective is, how does that feedback get back into the strategies, right? So I'm assuming it's our working groups, there's probably other things that we haven't talked about or I don't know about. Because that'd be the idea is, okay, teachers who are on the front lines who identify these things, how do their observations, their feedback get back into this loop and affect or impact the tactics and strategies?
So just another comparison of this elementary, middle school thing. So 5th graders in 2019, 8th graders on the 22, same students. Just kind of comparing 11 and 13 again. So 5th grader in 2019 took the 8th grade test in 2022. So if you look at 5th grade math 2019, it's 41, roughly 50%. Compare that to the 8th graders. In 2022, it's roughly 4%. So same students. What's the difference? Their math, their middle school experience. So to me, focus on school math, as you said. Talk about. I'm just reinforcing. Agreeing with that point.
And we knew this was going to be a focus. That's why we added the math coaches at every single building. We knew we needed to go back to the work of making sure we were piloting and getting a high-quality instructional resource as well.
I like Brad's linkage.
Yeah.
You know, that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
Did the math to figure out. Which students in 2019, what grade were they in
I didn't see you move
2022?
your fingers either. That was pretty good.
I had to write it down.
Okay, good. Carry the one.
I think it's, Brad, it is a good point. I will tell you it is not a new trend, right? Like both for District 200 and students statewide, you do see that trend as students move from grade 3 to grade 8, right? And again, I don't offer that as an excuse or as a suggestion that we don't put a heavy focus on middle school math, but you will see that trend as students move up through middle school, right? And as a former middle school principal, I saw 8th grade students at the point that they're taking the state test at their point in their 8th grade year, and it is not super easy to keep all 8th grade kids perfectly zoned in on the test piece, but the bottom line is there's a trend, and I think there's a clear set of information that tells us we see a difference across elementary into middle school. Right? Our middle schoolers also had a more disrupted school experience through the last couple of years than our elementary kiddos did. So
I want to add in too, I want to draw back to slide 8. When you look at the fast bridge achievement for our overall middle school students is at 61%, but then you see a lower percentage on IAR. When I dive into the results on IAR, they break it down into different categories of item types. The item types that our middle school students were having the most difficulty with look like the item types that you see here on these last 2 pages, where they're asking students to solve multiple problems, explanations, and this is why we see a difference with the FastBridge results, because FastBridge doesn't have these hand-scored items. And that's why it takes us so long to get the results back from IAR. So the elementary students did perform better on these types of items. And I believe that having a resource that has more of these types of items built into what our students are seeing daily, assessments that our students are seeing regularly, we are going to have better information. Our teachers will have better information at their fingertips on a regular basis.
Based on just thinking about what you said, and I had been thinking about when you said that, and overall, that the 2019 and 2022, that's actually my son. My son was a 5th grader in 2019 and an 8th grader at the end of last year. Oops, I know, I'm all mixed up here. I'm curious, did we lose, and to your point about how that's not a unfamiliar trend, did we, like in the fast-paced programs and things like that, like did we lose, in the middle school level, did we lose more of those kids from 6th grade to 8th grade than we would have normally? Because I think there is some shuffling there, you know, that kids who started in the fast-paced program in elementary, did they make it to?
Chris, you can probably answer that over.
And if you don't know that now,
enrollment.
that's fine, you know, that's fine, but.
Yeah, I don't have the exact number in front of me, but we didn't lose many students out of the program, right? So if you're saying kids that were in elementary, did they have to drop out once they got into middle school?
Well, in these these particular years, you know, that we're talking about here.
No.
Because seeing that the numbers went down, that did we, you know what I mean? Did kids just not?
Did kids have to go out of the program?
Yeah,
No,
no.
very rarely. Very
Okay.
rarely. I mean, there are certain situations, but
Right.
not
But
out of the
you
norm.
see more
No.
during the years of the pandemic.
No, not from my experience, but I can get that exact number for you if we want to look at comparative
think it's
stuff,
just
but
more
not a
like-
trend that we saw.
Okay, yeah, and I think that's all I'm getting, you know, from a trend perspective that, you know, and I think that was an interesting question that Chris had, with what are freshman math teachers seeing, and, you know, sample size of 1, because that was the one conference I had with my freshman son that, you know, I think he was typically struggling because they moved up a Jumanji level from 8th grade to freshman year, you know, so, but, yeah, I think that's interesting to know from a math perspective in those years. Did we lose, and it sounds like we didn't, so, thank you.
There's a slide further on in the presentation. We're going to look at 8th graders that were enrolled in Algebra 1. That's a state metric. And there's a slide further down where you look at 4 years of data.
Okay.
So
Great, thanks.
okay, I'm going to move into reading and ELA. So it's specifically called 2 different things because FastBridge is a reading test. IAR is half of a reading test and half of a writing test. So that's an important point as we go through this information. You're going to see that, we're going to talk about that. We have all of the same metrics on our dashboard for ELA and reading as we do for math. Okay, so here we're starting with FastBridge. Once again, we're looking at the comparison between our elementary performance and our middle school performance, the students who are performing at or above the 50th percentile last spring. Again, we set that same goal of 12% increase. I do want to, I think the demographic information is also important in this conversation when you look at the number of multilingual learners in middle school versus elementary. So we have almost double the number of multilingual learners in elementary versus middle school. So oftentimes when our students, we often call our multilingual learners like long-term multilingual learners in middle school. If they've been with us for a long period of time, they often have additional challenges as well. So, okay, so here we are in IAR, and we have that comparison 3rd through 8th grade. Again, we do see that difference between middle school results and elementary results. We're really going to dive into that in a few moments. And you can see the breakout by demographic groups as well. Okay, here you see that information, that's the comparison between 2019 data by demographic groups, 2021 and 2022. So overall, in the 3 through 5 space, we're just a little bit down from pre-pandemic results on IAR in the elementary space. Here, I think group seems to like these graphs. These show the comparison between grade levels in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, 2019 and 2022, where you see really the biggest difference being in 5th grade here. Okay, we're going to go into middle school. Here we do see the decrease between 2019 and 2022. Again, here is that comparison in performance level at each grade level, with the 8th grade looking different, the most different. This is, I think, the most important part right here. So the IAR assessment, as I told you, is half a reading test and half a writing test. Here, this graph shows you the breakdown of all of the item types. So for the reading assessment, there are items that are for literary text, there are items for informational text, and then there's vocabulary items. And then for writing, there's written expression is a majority of the assessment, and then there's conventions. That makes up a small percentage of the assessment. This is what the middle school team and I have spent a significant amount of time looking at and talking about. There's a sharp difference between the performance in reading and the performance in writing.
It's a time test.
Yeah, there's a timed amount.
It's not computer graded.
No, no. I want to say too, I wish I had some item types here for what this is. It's very different from the days when I administered this assessment in writing. This is complex. So students read more than one passage, often 3, on the same topic. They're asked to synthesize all 3 passages and write to a question.
All on a computer.
Yes.
So they have to be able to have multi-windows open to be able to look
They
at.
can't open multiple
So
windows.
you have to remember the text.
You can go back. You can go back to the passages. Yeah, so
So they were all done on the computer?
yes.
Do we have the option of doing paper?
We do not. We used to administer it on paper, but then the state made it a requirement to administer on devices if you have more than enough devices to administer the assessment.
I guess I'm just trying to think of developmentally, I mean, even older students as well, trying to compare texts and then write about them, and having to keep going back into, on a computer screen, you can't highlight, you can't underline, you can't, like,
It is very challenging.
very challenging.
It is very challenging.
With the
yeah.
clock ticking.
with the clock ticking.
I would do terrible too.
What did the group say?
Well, the group said we can do better.
Fair.
Yeah, the
We're
group.
speculating on causation, right? So I was curious what the group thought.
Teachers definitely talked about how they do feel like the writing portion, because when you look at that assessment, there's a box that looks like this for the writing, and it expands as students write. So our group definitely identified, like, we need to give like experiences for students. That was a conversation. I know one of our middle schools, they came up with the idea of developing similar types of items utilizing a Google form. If you've ever filled out a Google form where it has like the paragraph answer and it opens up like that, that's an experience our schools talked about giving our students.
And they can't open up any other window, like they couldn't do a draft in a Word document or.
No, they get a
and-
piece of scratch paper to put notes on.
Okay. So what do we have? So FastBridge doesn't look at writing, so what do we have that can look at? Because obviously there's some flaws in this, and I'm very curious, was the 25% pre-pandemic as well?
It wasn't as different. Writing has always been lower than our reading, but it wasn't as different as this.
Yeah, so I guess, was it mechanics or is it, cognitive?
Skills.
Skills.
Yeah, I think too, the level of writing maybe our students were doing, and they were in that remote setting, maybe not, it probably wasn't to the same degree that we were doing when we were regularly in our regular classroom setting. But what do we have to measure writing? Like, spoiler alert, when I get to the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about that, so.
So when we administered Park, though, that was on paper,
Yes, we administered it on paper in District 200.
because we didn't have the one-for-one technology, is that correct? or-
2019 was, I think, the first year that we administered fully online. So 2018, still, I think in 2018, we were administering via paper.
Are most, I should know this and I don't, are most of, like SAT, ACT, are those all online now, or is there a paper component? What I'm getting to is,
Yeah.
what are we
I know that
preparing
when
for?
my junior took the SAT at school last year, his writing section was not online, because you can go on the College Board and actually see his essay, if that
Okay.
makes sense. Yeah,
Okay,
so
I'm
it was
just-
handwritten.
Yeah, I'm just asking, because I'm like, if kids are going to be taking these kinds of tests online, and again, from the developmental perspective, it might
Yeah.
not make sense, but do you know what I mean?
Susan, I
Like-
think you'll see a little bit of both. I think a lot of kind of standardized entry exams, right? Even as you move beyond, like SAT, ACT have moved online. AP even is actually split. There are some AP tests that still give you an option of doing handwritten paper essay, and then some that they don't give you that option. So College Board is a little split in terms of of what they do. I do think, right, so there, there's kind of two elements to it. The just the mechanic of being familiar with the test, right? I've never been a big advocate for like teaching to a standardized test, right? I don't necessarily think that is a really productive exercise, but just as you would in a classroom, helping kids understand what they need to be successful as they show what they know on an assessment, you would do that in a classroom assessment, right? No teacher would give kids an assessment and say, oops, surprise, I'm not going to tell you at all how this assessment is going to look, because you genuinely want kids to be able to demonstrate what they know, right? You don't want the surprise of, so I think that aspect of helping to kind of prepare kids, as Melissa said, for the experience is good. The second element is just that skill of evidence-based reading and writing, I think, is critically important for kids, right? I look at what my son does in college now, and it's a lot of evidence-based reading and writing, right? So that skill of being able to take 3 separate pieces of text and synthesize and then, produce a piece of writing that, articulates a position and supports it, I think it is a really important skill. So, and I think that's where Melissa, I didn't think you were saying that. No, I
yeah.
didn't think you were. But
Okay.
I'm just saying, I think that's one thing you can take from there is that's not, like, focusing on that is not a teach to the test type mechanism. That is, I think, just something that's critically important for kids, and we can do much better in this cross-curricular space and how we're doing that.
Yeah.
But I think you'll hear that as we get into the end.
Any other reading or ELA questions? Okay, we're going to move into high school. So this is like the big picture of what the assessment landscape looks like, or the metrics on our dashboard look like in high school. So our students enter into their freshman year with a PSAT score from 8th grade. Actually, they just took this 2 days ago. Then they do take it another time while they're a freshman, and then we also have the freshman on track metric. We have PSAT 10, and then the 8, 9, and 10 score helps influence PSAT to SAT growth after they're taken it in grade 11. And then we have multiple metrics about our graduating seniors. We have our graduation rate, we have advanced coursework, and we have math and English proficiency. So once again, I just gave you the demographic information for high school. And I did put up the class of 2022 compared to all high school population, because we're going to spend quite a bit of time on the class of 2022. Graduation rate is a metric that we've had on our dashboard for a number of years. And you can see that we had great results last year with 95% of our students graduating. I do want to remind the board, this is never going to be 100%. It's never going to be at 100% because we have our transition students that are not considered graduates. We also have students that move into our schools with insufficient credits, and we're supporting them.
We're also measure students who move out of the district don't count as graduates.
Yeah, unless we can find evidence that they did graduate, which we do work to get. Yeah. But yes, anyone who enters as a freshman, we are responsible for until even if they move away.
Move away.
And they don't graduate, and we have no evidence.
Then it drops us lower from 100%.
Yeah,
Even though we had them for
correct. So this is just the historical information, because this is a metric we do have a lot of historical information on by demographic groups. There's minimal difference between those 4 years. Okay, advanced coursework. Again, this is a metric we've looked at quite a bit, but we have changed the metric this year. So this metric has always been about our graduates that have earned a C or higher in advanced coursework, which we had defined as AP or dual credit. We made the change to include industry recognized credentials now, because that's something that we highly value, especially with our career pathway work. We want our students to have one of those experiences. So I've also included more detailed information for you with regards to how many AP courses we have, how many dual credit courses we have. I do think it's important to note that we really have increased the number of dual credit courses this particular school year. I know I've presented about this multiple times to all of you, and I've always said this metric will increase when we have more dual credit coursework. And so this school year, we actually have more courses. We have Intro to Teaching 1 and 2. We have self-defense that will run second semester at Wheaton North. That's a PE course. That's a dual credit course. And we have British literature and Latin literature that run at Wheaton Warrenville South that are dual credit. We also know that TCD is offering, they've always offered dual credit, and we've been working with them more closely to make sure that our students are enrolled in getting that dual credit. I know Dr. Kyle's done a lot of work in that space. And then industry recognized credentials, once again, this is like an endorsement that almost like an endorsement students get that say they have a high level of skill to enter into the workforce. Currently, our students earn industry recognized credentials through TCD programming. Okay, so I can't show you historical data because it's not really a good comparison because we didn't have the industry recognized credentials before, but last year without it, it was at 70%. 70%? Yes, so here we are at 73%. We have set a goal of an 8% increase for this metric. And so you can also see the demographic breakdown. I do want to remind you, we've had that very strong programming at the high school, which we call AP Inspiring Excellence, where our teams work really, they're very diligent in identifying students and running summer programming for students for AP coursework.
It just visualizing it right now, 8% realistic goal.
We believe,
Seems high.
yeah, we talked about this because we're going to offer some more industry recognized credentials and dual credit coursework. We believe we're going to have, especially if you think about some of the dual credit courses that we added this year, we may be having some different groups of students. So.
Self-defense is the credit through COD.
Correct.
My seniors signed up for it. I had no idea. So I was wondering why I was signed up for it. But interesting.
Good. Okay, English and math proficiency. This is a new metric with Vision 2026, and I want to make sure you really understand it because this has a lot to it. So this metric comes from the College and Career Readiness Indicator that the State Board of Education developed. And students can meet proficiency through multiple measures. So they really only need to have met one of these bullet points. It can be through a course or an exam. When we talk about the course options, they have to have earned a C or higher. The course options are an AP course, a dual credit course, transitional, and Algebra 2. So transitional, if you remember, is the course, we offer transitional math. That was a course the board approved, I think it was 4 years ago. And this is the course that if our students take this course while they are with us and they earn a C or higher, they can go straight into credit-bearing coursework at a college. We do not currently have this course for English. The state just developed it, but it is something that our teams are working on. And then I also want to note, we don't really have an equivalent to something like Algebra 2 in the English space. So Algebra 2 is listed here because it's often considered a very important course to future college success in math. And so that's why Algebra 2 is listed. Okay, moving into the exam options, students can meet the criteria through an ACT, SAT, or AP score. I think it's really important for you to note, if they meet this requirement for math through the ACT or SAT score, they also have to be enrolled in a 4th year of math. I'll just pause here because I present this a lot and people often have to digest it for a moment or ask questions.
This is a basic number of students, percentage of students. So if a student passes 3 AP exams, it still counts as one student.
Correct. Oh, AP English or AP Math?
Well, whatever.
Yeah.
My point is, it's only one out of the total number of seniors.
Correct.
Yeah, we certainly have students that meet multiple bullet points, right?
You said they have to be in the fourth year of English.
No.
But English is required.
Oh, yeah, that's already required. Yes, thank you, yes.
So this is something that we created or Illinois State Board of Education created? This criteria?
It was through the college and career
Career
readiness, yeah.
Okay.
But Post-Secondary Workforce Act, that came to be.
And so the transitional math
Mm-hmm.
and that grade, that's only for an Illinois State school, correct?
Yes.
Like if they were going to a private school or they were going somewhere else, that does not count. It's just an Illinois State school.
Correct.
But I feel that community colleges in Illinois and Illinois State schools still do placement exams. So are we tracking to see if the students who complete transitional math are placing in college level? Or-
My understanding is they
wouldn't need to-
automatically
Okay.
place
So you're-
because they got
you're-
the C or better.
You're
Only in
ta- you're-
Illinois, though. State.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
But you're also taking, so one, when you develop transitional math and now transitional English, you have to do it with your local community college. So for us, it's developed in alignment with COD. I think that the belief is that students that will likely go this route of transitional math probably are looking at COD as the option post-secondary. Part of the course and part of the alignment of the course is that as a part of the course, you're in essence passing what would be the entry exam. So if you didn't take transitional math, you went to COD, and they required you to take a placement
Okay.
option. They use a program called ALEX that
Yes.
is their placement option. That has to be utilized as a part of the transitional math course.
But if they take transitional math and get a C, and yes, thank you.
Yes.
They don't, they can
Then,
just place
then
right in.
COD places them right in a credit-bearing course. There's no
Okay.
gate
Does
to.
the state track the percentage of advanced coursework?
Yes.
So does the state recognize the industry recognized credentials as part of advanced coursework, or is that a district recognition?
We added that to our advanced coursework description.
Okay, but when the state issues its percentage, it wouldn't include that, or?
There is a way that the state does recognize it, and we're actually going to talk about that in November. I'm going to be speaking about career pathways, and so at that point, I'm going to talk about endorsements that the state issues, and the industry recognized credentials considered as part of that too. So
So the state tracks it, but it doesn't necessarily lump them together in one. So they track a metric for advanced placement, advanced coursework, and they track a separate metric for the industry recognized credential piece. They kind of do it as two different elements. For I guess for our purposes, we think about it aligned to, and I think Chris, you asked a question. You know, those on the board that will remember from a few years back when you worked through the redefining ready presentation. This definition is very much aligned to the research that sits behind redefining ready, in recognizing that ultimately, so our goal, if you kind of stated very simply, is we want to graduate students that are ready to move to that next level of post-secondary experience. And there are multiple ways that a student can demonstrate that they're ready for that experience. Some will do it through a test score, right? They test well, they'll do well on a test. Other students will just never do well on a test and need a different pathway to still show that they're ready to be successful, and thus kind of those course options. We apply that same logic to thinking about really the early college experience. In the research says, well, if you can take a college course while you're in high school, demonstrate that you can be successful, it's likely a pretty strong indicator that you're ready, right, for the experience. I think the same. If you're a student that has an interest in a particular, career interest like fire science, right? If you can take and complete the credential while you're in high school, you're demonstrating, much like you do with an advanced course, that you're ready for that transitional experience. That's why we pulled it together, because, again, I think to Brad's question, really our interest is in tracking this student by student to ultimately know, does every student that graduates have an identified path, and do we believe with reasonable certainty that the student is ready for that pathway? So it kind of made sense to pull them together. That's kind of where our approach was.
Okay, so here you see for the class of 2022, the percentage of students that met that math proficiency result. We did set a goal of an increase of 10% through our Vision 2026 strategic work. So 69% of our graduating seniors met that criteria. English is lower, but I think it's very important to emphasize a few things in that space. One, again, we don't have an equivalent like Algebra 2. Two, we did not have any dual credit English coursework for the class of 2022. And three, we do not have transitional English. That's what really separates math and English. There's some, like, there were limitations for this cohort to be able to fully capture all of those opportunities. Okay. Yes.
I'm trying to assess my level of concern about seeing 0% multilingual, right?
Yes.
And I don't know. I'm just trying to, can you give me some more context to that? Maybe is a better way to ask the question.
Well, first of all, if you look at I think it's important to look at the actual number of students. Yeah, so there are 49 multilingual students in class of 2022, and I'm going to back up all the way over here. So if you're considered a multilingual learner and you're in high school, it's going to be really hard for you to be in an AP English course. We didn't have a dual credit English course. We didn't have a transitional English course. And if you're still being assessed, you're also still being assessed at that point for access, which is English proficiency. And so they aren't fully proficient in English. So to meet that ACT or SAT requirement is going to be incredibly hard to.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. So this is why we as a team have talked about the importance of transitional English, especially for multilingual learners, or even some of our other populations, that will be a gateway for them in the future.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, what would be a gateway? I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Transitional English.
Oh,
So we don't currently have that course. And transitional English would allow our students, if they take that course, they could enter into credit-bearing work and into a community college or other college.
I'm just looking, sorry, I'm just doing some math here.
Remember,
are-
you want to look at the class of 2022 chart on the far left, because that's all high school.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Melissa, senior year, those are elective English courses, so we would be looking at a transitional English as a possibility for that senior year instead of
Yes.
taking poetry or drama,
Yes.
one of those other classes.
Yes. Yeah, and COD gave us some guidance on the types of students that would be good candidates for that course as well. Certain GPA, certain SAT score. We also are looking at adding dual credit courses in English as well. PSAT to SAT growth, this is a metric that has sat on your dashboard for a long time, and we've never reported it. We haven't been able to report it because we haven't had a cohort that had from 8th grade to 10th grade information for us, but we do now. And so, as a reminder, students take the PSAT 8-9 twice. They take the PSAT 10, and then they take SAT. So we are looking at growth over the course of those, 4 times that they take those different assessments. And we completed a study to determine what adequate growth was. So Dr. Ozemkowski did that study. She worked with our teams to address, based on information from College Board, to set those growth measures. So here you'll see that we have 69% of those students making adequate growth from PSAT 8 to SAT. And we did set a goal of an increase by 10%. Freshmen on track is a metric that we have talked about multiple times. As a reminder, this is based on research from University of Chicago. It's a very important metric because students who meet this metric are 4 times as likely to graduate high school as students who aren't on track. So the state metric does define it very specifically. First-time 9th graders, they have to have 5 course credits without failing. They can only have a semester of failure, and that's in the core subjects they're tracking. So that's the English courses, their math courses, science, and social studies. So here you see the long-term trend data of freshmen on track. If you remember last year at this time, this was the metric I spoke to you about for quite a long time because we saw that very sharp decline of our freshmen. And so our high school teams, this was a very strong focus for our high school teams. We went through those kids by name. The position that you supported with the federal relief funding, the academic interventionists, this was a core part of their work. And so it is really exciting to see that we had, 98% of our students that were freshmen that were considered on track. So.
What about the students in 2020?
Yeah, we identified those students too, and the academic interventionist worked with them as well to do credit recovery.
So has that if you just look at that class, have they rebounded? Do you know what I
Yes.
mean? Where's that data
Yes.
point now? That, you know what I mean?
I don't have,
Okay.
I wish I had that exact data, but I know we had all of the names of those students, and we were tracking all year long. I often looked at it and would
Oh, I'm sure
see.
you did. I'm
Yeah,
not
no.
questioning
This
that.
was something that we cared deeply about, and I would often look at it and I would look and see how much progress we were making to ensure that students were back on track.
I just think that's an important point
Mhm.
so we're not like,
Yeah.
now they're.
We work to recover those credits.
Yeah, I guess the action plan, though. My name.
Yeah.
Specific tactics and actions, right?
The courses, I knew the exact courses.
But I think to prove
Yeah,
that,
no,
or
no,
that's
I'm
what I'm
with you,
saying,
with
to
you,
prove that, because I have no question that all
Yeah.
happened.
no,
But just I think it's important for the community to see, there was this big drop. We went on it hard, and that number,
With the ESSER class.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so our teams did a lot of winter credit recovery work. They did spring credit recovery work, so as the academic interventionist, but also additional teachers that signed up to support those kids, and summer. So here's the historical data for the demographic groups. You can see the red is the year that we just spoke about. And the blue is in line with previous years or higher.
I was looking at this a little bit ahead,
Mm-hmm.
and looking at the red to the blue on the right, 2022, the biggest growth is in low income,
Mm-hmm.
multilingual, Black, that's where the makeup was, so to speak. Just that, those differences really scream. I noticed the most.
Yeah.
But those are also the groups that scored the lowest on the assessment, so
And those are
trying to
the
figure that out.
subgroups that suffered the most. Nationally, there was just a big article. Those are the groups that
Absolutely,
biggest
yeah.
challenge.
Okay, we're going to move into the information about District 200 that's going to be released on the report card. So we are returning to a summative designation. We haven't had a summative designation since 2019. So schools receive a designation on their report card. It's the overall data for multiple accountability indicators. I'm going to dive into it more in a moment. And if you are deemed in a school improvement status, you stay in it for 4 years. So here are those 4 categories that schools fall into. The highest designation is called exemplary, and that's the top 10% of schools. The lowest is comprehensive, and that is schools that are performing in the bottom 5%. Just above comprehensive is targeted, and that means you have a subgroup, as they're called by the State Board of Education, subgroup that falls into that same performance level as the bottom 5%. And then everybody else falls into what is called commendable.
Provide some context why you stay.
They want you to be able to sustain the work, and they want to make sure that it's long-term.
So it's only for targeted though, correct? Or is that for all?
Comprehensive and
Comprehensive
targeted,
and targeted.
yeah. Mhm. So this is a bit complex, but I thought it was important that you had the context. It's multiple indicators that come together to make that summative designation. And so this is for elementary and middle school. So a majority of them come from academic indicators. Some of them come from what we call school quality and success indicators. A majority of that rating comes from growth in English language arts and math from the IAR assessment. On the high school side, some different metrics. So a majority of that indicator comes from graduation. But then there also are English language arts proficiency, math proficiency. That's determined just from SAT. So here are District 200 summative designations that will be released on our report card. So we do have 2 schools that fell into exemplary, and every other school is considered commendable. We have no schools in targeted support or comprehensive support. So.
Now, just a question.
Yeah.
And maybe it was from old procedures. If we were in targeted and you're in there, there are things you have to, like, big things you have to do, including allow people to, yeah.
The transfer piece, that was No Child Left
That
Behind.
was no child left behind, okay.
Yeah. But you do have to write a plan, and you have to
and-
work
right,
on,
yeah.
and you're monitored,
Okay.
yeah.
Do we know what percentage of students from Hawthorne fall into multilingual learners? I just feel like they have a pretty sizable group of.
Yeah, I
Okay,
can
just
look
curious.
that up in a
Yeah.
little bit for you, but I don't have that number at my fingertips.
I just think if they're scoring higher.
Hawthorne's
must be
a
doing
Title I
something-
school. We have to remember that too, and they do have a larger percentage of multilingual learners. I do not believe they have a bilingual program this year. They're one of those schools that fluctuates. Some years they do have a bilingual program, and some years they don't. So. Okay, so here's another metric that sits on the report card that has not been there for a while. Dr. Schuler spoke to this earlier. This is the IAR growth. This is a really important metric for us to talk about because this makes up half of the indicator for the summative designation. And so growth is measured by what they call the mean student growth percentile. So what they do is they take a student's score from 2021 and their score from 2022, and they look at how much growth they made from one year to another. And then they put them on this percentile band. So a growth percentile 50, that's average. If you're above that, you're above average growth. If you're below that, less than average growth. So here you see District 200's information. So the state always sits at 50. So that's the blue in the middle. So in 2019, it was at 50, and now it's also at 50. In 2019, our ELA growth was the 39th percentile. We are now at the 52nd percentile. So we have above average growth in ELA, although when we looked at our IAR results, if you remember, we were a little bit down in the elementary space, down in the middle school, but our growth is better than average for ELA. In math, we're right there at the average point, which is still considered good growth.
We grew over in math.
Yeah, exactly. I think that what you can take from this is the learning acceleration efforts are paying off.
I'm not understanding the state. So the state is always at 50?
Yeah, because it's on a bell curve.
Okay, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
because it's a percentile.
Thank you, okay, that helps.
Yeah. Okay, the scatter plots, you may remember we've spoken about the scatter plots before. So the scatter plots sit on the report card as a tool for you to be able to compare yourself to other schools in the district that fall in similar demographic groups.
Or schools.
Yeah, excuse me. Thank you for the
Or
correction.
districts
Yeah,
in the state.
yes. Thank you.
My favorite. Once you figure it out.
Yes. I'll try my best to explain it so everyone understands here. So we are looking right here at SAT math. And when you run the scatter plots, this is a screenshot, but you can, it's live data it's data you can change. So you can filter it by different demographic groups. So what I took a screenshot here of is for low income. So in District 200, we have a little over 20% of our students fall into low income, but we had 50% proficiency overall on SAT. So you can see, I like to look at this, I look at the band that's in, like, if you can just narrow in on that 20% and draw some lines in between there, and you just look up and down at all, we're the red triangle. And those other blue dots are other unit school districts. So you can see, this is math, we're a high outlier there for our demographics.
So I look at a vertical line between 20 and 30%.
Yes.
So of all the unit districts in the state with roughly 20 to 30% low income,
Mm-hmm.
there's only one school district that is achieved higher than us in
Mm-hmm.
the entire state.
Mm-hmm. Well, for
School
unit,
district.
yeah,
Unit
unit districts.
Unit school
Yeah,
district.
yes.
Oh, because you included the 30%. as your
Well,
top.
I'm drawing that
Yeah, yeah,
band
got
between
it.
20 and
Yeah.
30%.
Okay, this is that same information, but now we're looking at it for English language arts. We're still looking at it for low income, and again, still a high outlier.
I seem to remember a conversation years ago. Talked about how the number one indicator of student achievement is poverty level. I seem to recall that. So I like these because it's natural to compare ourselves to other unit districts that we typically benchmark, but our low income percent of students is, for the most part, on the high end of those districts. So it's really hard to compare what I recall, it's really hard to compare achievement us, say, compared to Naperville to substantially different demographics. So that's why I like this, because it compares us across the state to similar unit districts. And this is telling me this, we're the, pretty much the highest achieving, one of the highest achieving unit districts in the state, given roughly the same demographic.
Yeah, definitely, like high outlier with similar demographics. We're sitting there. That red triangle sits at the top.
Is there any value if you, just using this data point, right? So let's, if we go out to the 70 percentile, you know, there's just one extreme outlier at 60%, right? Going, who is that? What are they doing differently? What's going on there? And how is that something?
Yeah. And I think what Melissa mentioned is, as you're looking at this in the live version, you will see who that person is, right? Like you can identify the district. Yep. Yeah.
Who's that?
You can identify the district, and I think identify in that if there is a good, point of comparison with a few of them. Sometimes what you see when you hover over some of the very, very high outliers is they're very specific, like magnet school elements. So you just have to be a little bit careful in how you look at it. But that's exactly how I think you can utilize the scatter plots as a data point to look at those that are around you that performance may be a bit higher and see what you can learn from them.
The other thing when you look at this, the slope goes down to the right. So
Yeah.
the higher percentage of low income, the achievement drops. Pretty consistent level.
I think if we had Julie Ozumkowski here, our statistician, right, she would tell you in a chart like this, what you're looking for is sort of the line of good fit, right? Like there is a band that is going to go from the left, right, sort of top left, straight down, right, toward the right, and you can probably draw a band, and that's where you ultimately can, when you sort of draw that band, see where you fit sort of within the range of where you're at, right, as you consider it. Certainly performing where you need to be.
No. So the question is, what's your?
Yeah.
Okay.
Quick question. So I know that this is 11th grade data, and then over here on slide 31, we have class of 2022 data. So on slide 31, low income is 31% proficient, but on slide 47, it's about 46%.
This is the overall proficiency.
So I went two things.
If you look at math,
Yep.
it's still
But
34.
Angela, it's not so. I want to be really clear, so this not misunderstood. This is not just the performance of our low income students. This is the performance of all of our students, but it's putting the performance of all of our students on a graph that's also showing what a percentage of low income is, right? So, I just as an example, if our percent low income were 10% higher, we had 35% of our students low income, our performance doesn't change, right? We would just be our dot would go further over to the right. So this is not just the performance of our low-income students, it's the aggregate performance of all students, right? So that your left, right, axes, like up and down, right, is your aggregate performance, right? Where it's going left to right is based on the percent low income of the students that took the test.
Correct, but where is it showing proficiency of low-income students?
It's not on here. It's not. This is the aggregate performance of all students, right? But
And saying that we have 20% low income in our district. Yes.
correct.
Okay, that's,
So if you go, right, look where our red triangle is, right? If you go straight up or down, right, in a line straight up or down from that, that is going to be every other unit district that has the same percentage of low income. If they're below the red dot, that means their aggregate student performance is lower. If they're above the red dot, that means their aggregate student performance is higher, right? So I look at, see there's There's a little blue dot that's, you know, a little bit further to the left, but kind of above ours. That's a pretty good outlier, right? Like that's a district that actually has higher performance, only a slightly lower percentage of low income. To Rob's point, that's probably a district you want to take a look at and just understand what is it that they're doing in the strategy space that, right, is different. But that's what this, ultimately any of these charts are reporting out the aggregate performance of all students. It's just allowing you to like pull that metric out and compare it to some of the demographics that typically are correlated to academic achievement as well, right, on a test. That make sense?
And that population, grade 3.
This
No,
is
this
grade
is
11.
just SAT.
Oh, this is SAT, yeah, you said that, sorry.
Just
Yep,
SAT.
got it.
So what would be interesting about this? So if I look to the right of us and above us, there's 7 school districts. Then if you go to the math one,
Oh,
okay, so you go to the math one, it looks like there's maybe 3. So are those the same districts, or are they?
Find
It'd
out.
be interesting
Yeah.
to Rob's point to really see whether certain districts, what are they doing?
I just want to say, I just think these two graphs are really important for our community to understand, because we get questions about these numbers that, you know, that say, well, 50% of our students are proficient. Like, that's doesn't sound so good, you know, the kind of thing. But when you look at it on a graph with all the unit districts in our state, we're doing pretty darn good, you know what I mean, as far as what we're doing. And so I think this is just a concept that can be difficult for the community to understand how to put these numbers into context. So I really appreciate spending some time on these couple of graphs and explaining them.
I think we've talked about it a few times that the cut score for SAT, the state set a higher cut score for SAT than College Board's cut score too. So the cut score is high. Okay. Susan, this goes to the point you were talking about a little bit earlier about pace. So on the report card, there's a metric, 8th grade students that are enrolled in Algebra 1. So our fast-paced students, the sequence of their coursework takes them to geometry. And then we also do bring in some students that are not part of that fast-paced program, but they have the opportunity to take Algebra 1 before leaving 8th grade. So Algebra 1, important course to take if you're interested in continuing into like a STEM field, because you can go further in your course sequence in high school. So here you see the percentage of students that were enrolled in Algebra 1 over the last 4 years. So we have seen a little bit of a decline this last year over 2019. So this is students who've taken geometry or algebra in 8th grade. So the Equity Journey Continuum is a new piece of information on our state report card. And this is a tool that allows you to look at data through the lens of equity. And so the state has developed this continuum to report out data where they say a 1 is a large gap in equity and a 4 is a minimal gap in equity. And this is very, very important. This will sit on a report card, but all of the data is from the 2018-19 school year. It is not updated data. Yes, that's important to note. So they have 3 big buckets of data elements that they report out: student learning, learning conditions, and elevating educators. And you look at all of those pieces of data that come together for that rating. So a lot of different pieces. This is brand new this year.
Brand new, but using 4-year-old data.
Yes.
So it's a benchmark.
Yes. Yes. So here you see a screenshot of those categories. This is District 200's information. So you see a screenshot of those 3 categories and where we fell according to the 2018-2019 data for student learning, learning conditions, and elevating educators. So I'm going to just dive into the student learning part of it here. So here are all of the metrics for the student learning portion of the equity continuum, and you see where we fall. So it starts out with, it's called participation in high quality pre-K, but what they're using is data from the kids assessment. That's administered to all of our kindergartners within the first 40 days of kindergarten. Then you see student performance for IAR, SAT, and DLM. That's what our most significant special education programs, the students in those programs would take that assessment. Here's where we've talked about the ML data quite a lot tonight, but here's where that equity journey continuum is an important data point when you talk about EL progress to proficiency. That is where our highest data point sits right now. So this is the access test and how our students are growing from year to year in their English learner proficiency, language proficiency. Graduation rate. I have concerns about that one because transition students are a group and they won't graduate on time. So
They won't graduate on time per the state's definition.
Yes,
To be really
thank you.
clear, we do
Yeah.
allow our transition students walk with their class. They complete. This is just when we say graduate, that's based on the state's definition.
So when you say you're concerned about it, who's concerned about that is
yeah, because that's a group that will have inequities inherently.
so it's not a
Because
concern of how.
no,
No.
a concern on the metric.
Right.
Concern on the metric. Yeah. How they're defining the metric. Yeah. Then you have the advanced, you have Algebra 1. You had advanced programming, advanced coursework, AP dual credit.
So we have no idea, I guess I'm just frustrated by this, but we know we don't have a choice. We have no idea to say the equity work that's been done in the district for the last 4 years, what does that look like? Because we're still using data from 2018.
I think you do. I mean, I guess I would say go back to every slide you just looked at tonight, and every slide is going to give you a look of. I mean, this shouldn't surprise us that we see. Yeah, I mean, it's frustrating that this data is old, but again, I think you certainly see differences in levels of performance when you look across our demographic and every other slide that you've looked at tonight.
Can I just, I think that's my one, I mean, well, it's not, what I have a concern about, I think there's a lot to celebrate here, and is that point, and I guess I just want to hear again with those different demographic groups, and our non-white students, our low-income students, like, is there something specific that is happening in those groups? Is it, or is it, a lot of what you have explained as far as we know who those kids are? Like when I was doing the math, like the class of 2022 English proficiency, for our black students, so that's 13%, which means 9 out of 71 of our black students, only 9 of our 71 students are proficient. And I guess, how is that specifically being addressed? How in trying to close those specific gaps?
So in a little bit, we're going to talk about our school improvement plans.
Oh,
So
okay.
let me.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean
No,
to get
no,
ahead
no.
either.
It's a fair question. I'm just going to write it down to speak to school improvement plans and that.
Okay.
So
Susan, one little part of that, though, that I do want to answer is that I think our strategy has always been to focus on a strategy to lift everybody up, right? So when you talk about closing an achievement gap, you can approach closing an achievement gap in two ways, right? You either focus on like pulling the two, sort of disparate ends together, or you focus on lifting everybody up. We've always taken an approach of looking. So every piece of data you see reported tonight is really reported looking at the students that meet whatever that standard is, right? We report it on a student-by-student basis because the strategy is also very focused on how do we lift every student up, right? So I think it's important to look at information disaggregated, but important to understand that our task is to look student by student at how do we give that student what they need, right, to create conditions that will allow them to elevate. So never will you see a strategy that's about pulling a top down, right, to close a gap, but it is about, to your point, what you just did is the exact same thing that our teams do, looking student by student, but obviously at the school level with a name attached to it, right? We know who the student is, what their learning experience profile looks like, and what opportunities we need to create through either intervention, support, or opportunity to accelerate to that data point, right?
Yeah.
Like big picture, that is the goal, is to elevate all, right? I think it's tough. Closing gaps can be very, very difficult, because I think what you see across the system, again, as you look at, sort of where the growth metrics have moved, right? Like kids are learning, right? So at the same point that you're working hard to elevate all students in the system are still learning and learning at pretty accelerated rates.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we're ever going to fully close every achievement gap that is going to exist, but I think we can continue to focus student by student on, we have 1,000 kids that graduate, roughly 1,000 kids that graduate every year. Mm-hmm. The ultimate marker is, what are we doing for each of those 1,000 students, right? How are we helping them to achieve that path, right? It is great if we have some students that are really successful in the national merit space, and they get, they sort of accelerate in that way. But what is important is to know that each student has that path or opportunity, right? That's the success.
Yeah, and that thank you for that. And I think for community purposes, I just wanted that said out loud. And I think about, and I might not be remembering this right, something that Mary had talked about at a meeting that, to your point, that each student has their own growth. You know what I mean? That a student can start here and get to here, and that's still a tremendous amount of growth. And, we of course want them to hit proficiency, but maybe they don't, but they've still had to your point, they still have had a tremendous amount of growth. And I think that's important to work inside to what a student's capable of in their world and the issues that they're facing and that kind of thing. So, but no, I appreciate that explanation. Thank you.
I think with FastBridge, though, this is going to help with that, because we're identifying those students, we're looking at them at 3 different points of the year. As we start, we're going to start to see that change, because we now have names, faces, and something structured, a system in place to really be delving in and giving those interventions when we need to at the younger ages, so that hopefully we're starting to see that gap start to shift, because we're really digging into who is that person, who is that child. And
I'll remind you too, we unfortunately, we don't have that growth data.
Yes.
You're going to have that again, like next year. You're going to be able to see not just the achievement, but the growth.
Yeah.
So we're seeing that with like the English learner progress to proficiency. We saw it with IAR. That's going to be a really important data point to talk about, especially with students that are, below that 50th percentile.
Yeah.
We want them to cross that threshold, but we want all of them to make adequate growth. Every student to make adequate growth.
But we're going to be able to now see those checkpoints during the year. If somebody is starting to go not making that growth, we're going to be able to intervene easier than when we were getting this once a year report.
So ultimately, this is the big question. How does all of this information inform our work plans and our school improvement plans? So this visual right here is one that I use all the time with our teams. These are the three big areas that the Ed Service is working on. At the center is the learning acceleration or accelerating learning, but paired with that is balanced assessment that you just spoke to with FastBridge, the state data, and the classroom data. Those are all important. And then last, our ultimate goal is college and career readiness. So this is just a reminder of what the definition of learning acceleration and balanced assessment are. I feel like we're well versed in that space. So Dr. Schuler mentioned at the start the importance of the Vision 2026 strategic plan and how all of our work has to be aligned. And that is exactly what we have in place. You have a District 20 work plan that we're going to go through that's aligned to Vision 2026, but it's also been agile to what we've seen in these results, and that's very evident in our school improvement plans. So every one of our schools works with our senior leadership team. They work with our directors over here in developing a specific school improvement plan. And all of these arrows are aligned, and we're collectively working on all of this. So when we talk about elementary learning acceleration, your work plan has those top two bullets. We're implementing illustrative math, and we're going to be piloting, starting in December, high-quality instructional materials for English language arts. Based on the metrics that we saw, our school improvement plans also are focusing on those three bottom bullets. We have non-pilot teachers. They're beginning to explore these ELA shifts, and one is right there, evidence-based reading and writing. We also are ensuring our Tier 2 interventions are aligned to the IM resource, and we know that their foundational skills are essential, and we have a very big focus right now on students who don't have solid footing in that, especially in second grade. Our ELA instructional materials that we're piloting have high quality resource with that. Our reading specialists are well versed in it, and they have started using it in second grade classrooms and with students that we have concerns about in the foundational skills space. So just like can't say enough great things about the work that they've jumped on in that. In middle school, Angela mentioned it, we are piloting math curriculum, but we're also starting to have conversations with our English language arts teachers and our social studies teachers about their curriculum to start doing work. But based on the assessment results, particularly those ones in writing, we are working on evidence-based reading and writing now, even before we have a curriculum. So we have schools that have spent time developing writing common assessments so that they can check in on their middle school students. When we talk about college and career readiness in the high school space, those first three bullets are ones we're going to talk about a lot more in November about career pathways, transitional math, a fourth year of math. We identified that as very important, identifying students who aren't in a fourth year of math, and also supporting our students at TCD. But based on the metrics, our high school teams identified two more areas of focus. Students who need additional support in Algebra 2, so they have that passing grade, and our PLCs at the high school have a focus on the important skills to help accelerate that growth from PSAT to SAT. When we talk about the goal of balanced assessment, we have a lot of work happening. So we are implementing FastBridge. That's giving us new and different and better data than we've had in the past. You approved an analytic tool at your last board meeting, and that's really, really important to this work about demographic groups. For our leaders to be able to go and get the information at their fingertips and to be able to sort it by analytic, with our analytic tool, that's critically important. And then we are also talking about the importance of classroom assessment practices. And then finally, this is, again, I want to highlight just how the resource that we are using in the elementary space and the resources we're piloting in middle school for math have better alignment to test items that they would see on the state test. So that's this document we looked at earlier before. And then I also just want to remind the board of the decisions that we made with the federal relief funding that do support our learning acceleration plans and our in the importance of curricular materials. We talked about some of them tonight, but just a reminder so you have them all collectively at your fingertips here. So there were 3 grants that we talked about at length, and then the state issued some more money with the IDEA grant. That's our grant for our special education students that came out late last year. And so that you see the timeline on that as well. So for ESSER 2 that closes out, it's September 30th, 2023. These are the last remaining items we're using those funds for that are related to learning acceleration and curriculum work. So we still are supporting our students who are at home in a quarantine situation or any remote learning. We had stipends and benefits to support students in the summer. We used that money to purchase illustrative math materials and subscriptions to credit recovery software that we use with our high school students. ARPS 3, we have 2 more years on this. This is where all of those salaries and benefits sit for the multiple intervention positions that are playing such a huge and critical role to all of this work. The addition of the math interventionists, the addition of the middle school math coaches, the high school academic interventionists that we spoke about that did all the work with the freshmen on track, the addition of a middle school director in my department, addition of a tech and innovation coordinator that sits with Jason's department. We did identify some additional support we wanted to give Wheaton North this year in the area of math. So we utilized some ARPS or grant funds for that, and then summer learning. And then this is also where curricular purchases, the funds sit for middle school math manipulatives in the elementary space, and also the materials for elementary ELA. We utilize these funds to purchase the pilot materials that you all approved. And then lastly, for IDEA, their federal relief funds, there's a list here there for you with some additional positions, some additional interventions, and supporting the work we're doing in math. So I reached the end.
So my observation of those last few slides, really complicated budgeting discussions in 2 summers. I predict we're going to see all this investment is going to continue to impact students and impact growth. But when it goes away, we don't want to get rid of those staff. So, 2 years, it's going to be a challenge. That's my prediction.
I wonder if we have a decline in enrollment, if that'll kind of even out, perhaps, some of that.
Are we seeing an uptick though in enrollment?
But we still have an overall decline. I mean, we have a little bit more than what we anticipated on those enrollment projections, so.
Yeah, yes. I think fair. I think it's a fair question, right? And I think we saw some of that. Angela, actually, even this year. So, across the board, when Charlie did his HR staffing presentation and just showed you the overall head count, so our overall head count is up largely because of staff that are actually devoted to some of our special population programs, right? Staff devoted to our multilingual programs, we have seen a sharp increase in students in our special education programs. So a lot of our move-in student population has actually come with students that are bringing, specific needs and have some staff. We've been able to offset that by some general enrollment drops, so we actually have cut some core sections that we haven't, but overall still we're up. So I think it's fair, and I think we may see a little bit of that. But the answer will be to what degree that's offset by some of the demographic within the population that calls for different levels of staff.
This is a little off topic. So this is 2 through 12. And we've heard that like age 3 through kindergarten, we're seeing some increased needs. So I think that's maybe something to look at. Do we need to add more in those areas? Like, are we addressing that as well? And are we identifying kids in that 3 to 5 range who would benefit from, coming in and having services that may not be qualifying under an IEP or something like that? Like, I guess an at-risk, but I know that we don't.
Yeah,
quite.
and that was one of the reasons with the IDEA, ARP federal relief funds, we, after we saw the information on the equity journey continuum, Erica Ekstrom actually wrote in there like the Jefferson tuition scholarships for some of the funding to support that as well. Small amount, but it was something we looked at because of that information.
And I wonder, Brad, if that's going to be something 2 years from now, too, that we're going to be considering more support at the kindergarten,
Yes.
first grade level. So we may be having those tough discussions.
Yeah, and I think, so one, I remember a meeting or two ago, I think the board had expressed an interest in getting an update very soon on just kind of understanding what our current kindergarten situation looks like, right? Percentage of kids that are full day versus half day, and Dr. Sloggy's been gathering that. It's going to bring it to you to kind of show you what that looks like now compared to what it looked like 5 or 6 years ago, and I think that'll be interesting. I think the other reality is that we certainly put in place a new early childhood center. That enrollment is higher than it's ever been, right? And that is students qualifying for early intervention. So that's not just tuition based. More kids are coming because they like that preschool opportunity. Certainly, we've got a longer wait list on the tuition paying side, but just students qualifying, we are substantially above projections, right, in that early childhood space, and I don't think that's going to change. So, I don't know that it's going to be this board, but a future board certainly may sooner rather than expected even be looking at expansion of that facility, which we designed it to be able to do that as the need fits. But we used to have a couple of Head Start programs, non-Jefferson early learning programs that were in that building. They're not in that building. We're still housing the programs in other schools, but Jefferson right now is just serving Jefferson.
Do we still have that, the collaborative?
Yep.
So as I'm kind of thinking about what Angela's saying, it's making sure we're getting people to go through screenings, to go through all of that. Like, we want to, that outreach. So we still have an ability through that, for some of that outreach, to start identifying earlier the needs. Any questions for Mrs. Murphy?
Is your head spinning a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's
Well,
like
yeah,
totally.
I know, yeah, I was like, I gotta
You
let
gotta
this
process
sit for
it
a
all.
while, but
No,
I
I-
so appreciate it.
Big picture for me you all know the nuances that's better for us than we can absorb in a single meeting, but just like to keep going.
Yeah. And I know last little piece I'll just remind. So remember, as we move into the 23 calendar year, we do have 3 committee of the whole opportunities. Generally, January, we will look at finance projections, your 5-year projections as a part of that. But there's space on those agendas. So, you know, as you step away from this, look again at this information and say, boy, this aspect, I'd really like to do a deeper dive into. Like, let us know what you want to continue to look at on a deeper level, either in terms of, you know, strategy. So this whole area of sort of early learning from, you know, our early childhood up through kindergarten piece, that, you know, that's something we can certainly do a little deeper dive into how we're addressing that and what that future is going to look like. So again, I'm not going to have to, but just point of the study sessions is like, you tell us what you want to do, kind of a deeper dive into as we move through the year as well.
Melissa, thank you. That was a lot and great. Just personally, where do I find, and this is probably something I should have maybe looked at last year, but we didn't really have data, but where do I find how IAR currently differs from what Park was? Like, is there somewhere on ISB's website? Like, how do I?
I don't think there is, but I can certainly provide
You mean
that.
just the difference in terms of the assessment itself, or the results off the
The
assessment?
assessment itself.
It's a great question. We can probably see if we can find.
We actually presented about that
Yeah.
at a CAC meeting,
Okay.
so I can pull it. I can pull that together for the board.
Largely, IAR simply took the park items and sort of put it under its own umbrella of assessment. So park was the whole assessment, and I think what IAR did is bought the items and then sort of packaged it for its own system. So
And shortened the assessment
shortened
too.
shorten the windows.
Yeah.
But
So the number of testing sessions became shorter at every grade level between Park and IAR.
And Park was, if I remember right, wasn't it at 2 different
Only
points?
one time,
wasn't
one
it?
time they had the first assessment in March and then the second assessment in June. That was only a one-time thing.
But the reason I ask is back in the days of developing or the state implementing Park, and I think Faith Dahlquist was here, and we had a lot of conversation about the question of the developmental appropriateness of Park. So I guess I had assumed that IAR was kind of going back to more of an ISAT, but it's still kind of more of a Park assessment basis on it. So that these numbers have a different meaning for me if that's the assessment.
it is largely a park assessment, I think, from the test perspective.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's very different than ISAT. And I'm sorry to keep going back to this document, but I think it really tells the story. The types of items that are on this document are not similar to the types of items that sat on the ISAT test.
That gives me a lot to think about because, and I'm glad we're not teaching to the test. Maybe I should just say it that way. Because I question some of the developmental appropriateness of these tests for the park. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, just 2 comments. There's 2 things screaming out at me: middle school math and writing, and it's kind of the achievement gap between subgroups. Those are the 4 things that I think need our attention most. Continue to need our attention.
I think one of the things too, when you look at all of the list of federal relief funding and where we're giving it, one of the things that's not listed there is an ELA coach in the middle school space.
Any question?
Uh-huh.
In the future?
I think that's just important to bring up. That that's something the middle school principals have talked about, especially with the curricular work we want to do.
And I think that's a really important piece as we are going into our January and looking at needs in that for next year is there something that we're missing, staffing-wise, that our experts within our buildings are saying, we really need this?
I agree with Brad. Those are like a great takeaways, and just maybe add on the early childhood kindergarten component, because
Yeah.
that has some concern.
Anything else? Do we have any public comment? No public comment? Okay. There being no further action to come before the board in open session, I ask for a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Booten,
Second.
second by Mrs. Blattner. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Our meeting is adjourned.